Now once more I must ride with my knights to defend what was and the dream of what could be.
Welcome to the Restitutor Orbis channel, and today we're exploring Saint Augustine, the first Old World city. We're now finally in Florida, where we have incredible hotels that line the great city of Saint Augustine, built by a tremendous self-made oil man, Henry Flagler. We also have a neat treasury where people get married in. And we have a castle that was built by 2 people in 4 years. Let's begin our exploration of Saint Augustine. Located on the northeastern side of Florida, or the Atlantic coast side, Saint Augustine was originally founded by a Spanish conquistador in 1565. That's right, and when we hear Spanish conquistador, we know these are individuals who mean business. You think Napoleon was a military genius? The Spanish conquistadors, they could overcome any odds, 100 to 1, 1,000 to 1, and don't even bother talking about logistics. Here in this depiction, we see, though, that St. Augustine was constantly under threat by those nasty English and their terrifying raider ships and their piracy. And so the Spanish had to take methods to defend against that. This is supposedly a depiction from the Spanish time of St. Augustine, and wait a minute, what the heck is this? Well, are the English chasing and killing a whale? A blue whale? Let me guess, the whale could talk? He was the one who built the city, and the Spanish called him Wilbur. In all seriousness, though, when we look at St. Augustine, we see that it's another geometrically precise foundation structure with the entire city. It's not just the fort or castle of St. Mark, as the Spanish called it. And we can see that the geometrically precise foundation structure surrounds the entire city, as it seems to have with every single city that was constructed, founded, or whatever terminology we want to use in Europe, and here in what they would call the colonial United States, or colonial America, or whatever terms you want to call it. When we look at the current fort, castle, it's had all those names, and it's had none of them, we see the intricacies in the construction. And once again, is this a remnant of some sort of previous civilization, or is this really just a very incredible fort that the Spanish decided to build in very challenging conditions? I mean, why build a fleet to challenge the English when you could build a stationary fort that someone could just go around? And on other plans in the city, you can see even the details of that original geometrically precise foundation structure surrounding the city. And then you see what we'd consider the traditional fort of St. Mark, as it was renamed when the English did eventually take control of the city. Then they gave it back to the Spanish in a treaty. Then Andrew Jackson showed up, and then Florida became part of the United States. And yes, I'm simplifying and overviewing it, but most of the buildings we're going to be taking a look at from St. Augustine, Florida, were once again from the 19th century. I know, surprise, surprise. In fact, really the only building that's not is the castle or fort of St. Mark. In any event, we can see, though, that there seems to be many indications that St. Augustine was well built up from the very beginning. And granted, these are just drawings and depictions. These don't necessarily prove anything. But they do give the idea that there was much more going on in St. Augustine. And let's start with the Hotel Alcazar, built in 1887, Spanish Rebirth Revival style. Yes, and this is one of the Henry Flagler specials. Henry Flagler, the individual who got in with Rockefeller and Standard Oil. And we have here the plaque that indicates that everything happened exactly as we're supposed to know and believe, and these plaques are very educational, and they make sure that we don't go off with any crazed thoughts about what the potential origin of this building could be. In fact, here's the curator, Lady Elaine Fairchild, so it's also a museum. Don't get in trouble with her or she'll throw a boomerang at you. Speaking of magic, we can see, though, that this was a very impressive structure from the very beginning, and again, the finest building techniques of the 1880s. We're also told that there was some sort of revolutionary concrete pouring technique that involved pouring it in sections, and then Henry Flagler decided to use this on all his buildings. But we'll look at the individual who supposedly convinced Henry Flagler to come down here and build these incredible hotels, and his unique concrete pouring methodology later. Appreciating these buildings, though, we don't see things that look like specific Spanish Revival Rebirth style, and yes, I know it's Renaissance, but I'm just laughing at the fact that it's an overlap of terms. Once again, we see that Roman Greco architecture, or the touches within. On the inside, it looks like there was a very nice pool. And this isn't exactly the pool that you would expect to see in a hotel, but it's very lavish and well laid out. Now, why is it they always had pools on the insides of these hotels? And why don't we have pools like this now? It looks like it'd be a lot of fun to me. And of course, we have the very beautiful and painstakingly crafted, artistically amazing colored windows. I really wish we still had colored windows like this in modern buildings. Wouldn't that be neat? This structure still stands, and you can see that it has a lot of wondrous details with the columns and the arches. And once again, despite this being a Spanish Rebirth Revival style or Spanish Colonial Rebirth Revival style, we see a lot of Greco-Roman touches in it, again with the columns. So, I don't know. It almost feels like someone is just randomly slapping names and designations onto different types of buildings as though they're trying to cater to a particular account. I don't know why anybody would do that. And this is the Leitner Museum, which is what this hotel has been converted in addition to being the City Hall. And I'm sure they could get a multitude of other uses from it. On a more lighthearted note, it is good to see, though, that this incredible edifice is being used and being maintained, and it's not being victim of the wrecking ball, which seems to be something that comes up a lot whenever we do these explorations, as we find out how these wonderful, amazingly built and beautiful buildings from the 19th and early 20th century are always deemed unusable. I'm still amazed, though, by all the images that we have of this pool that used to be in the hotel. And yes, I suppose it makes sense that there should be a pool in there. But it just gives you the impression of some luxury and opulence, and yet at the same time, imagine if such a structure was widely available for everyone. Well, here's what it looks like today. And no, unfortunately, there's no pool. It's really just a main lobby now, it seems. And still, it has some impressive architecture in it. And wouldn't it be nice to convert it back into a pool? Okay, I'll get the pool off my mind. We can also see, though, that in some of the other layouts we have some impressive pillars and very well built walls that run up to the ceiling. So again, it seems as though this is a structure that was very well built. And of course, Henry Flagler was the man behind it, making the new concrete pouring technique something that was possible and investing all of his resources in it. Although what's interesting is when you look at how Henry Flagler got involved with Standard Oil and Mr. Rockefeller, the story is quite intriguing. They even say that Henry Flagler's stepbrother was the one who ponied up the dough so Henry Flagler could get in on Standard Oil, and he was involved in grain shipping. It's quite a fascinating account, and I don't think it's worth covering. Yes, and here we have the statue of our Spanish conquistador, infinite masters of logistics, and the ones who would never sneer at being outnumbered 100,000 to 1. They could always overcome those odds, despite the fact that they had very puffy sleeves and interesting frills around their necks. This is an intriguing room, too. It just seems as though we have many different variations within this single hotel. No wonder they could convert it into a museum and a city hall now. You wonder what else they could do with it. Well, let's look at the Cathedral Basilica of Saint Augustine, 1793 to 1797. Apparently built when the oldest continual Catholic congregation in the United States decided to update and upgrade their cathedral before Andrew Jackson showed up. And of course, we have our little plaque here that designates it. And this is the later plaque that came out in 1999. So only about 24 years, and you can see it's holding up really well. Talking about the Jesuits and the missionaries and labeling it back to its original historical foundation. And then we have another plaque from 1970. And look at how much plaque degradation we have. I mean, we're only looking at 53 years here. You would think that they would put a little bit more money into making these plaques last a little longer. Maybe it just needed to be cleaned. It's an impressive cathedral on the outside, especially when we consider that, remember that Florida was under Spanish rule when they built this in the 1790s, although we also understand that was in the nascent period of the United States after the Constitution. And let's not forget the fine suppressing of the Whiskey Rebellion in Pennsylvania. That's what was going on contemporaneously with the building of this incredible cathedral basilica. And it is another cathedral basilica, and why shouldn't it be, as it's the foundational structure of the oldest congregation within the United States. There's some older pictures that don't have the usual issues that we have when we look at older pictures, but they definitely depict the grand opulence of the cathedral basilica. We can never get enough cathedral basilicas. Now, the interior might seem a little bit more modest compared to what we've seen with some other cathedral basilicas, such as the one in St. Louis. However, considering the fact that we're told this is older, we still see some very beautiful touches on the inside. There's also a little bit more of something that seems natural with the structure. Now again, are those pews originally part of the construction plan, or were they added later? I don't know. Let me know in the comments what you think. And what do you think of the unique ceiling arrangement with this? There's also some beautiful artwork, and of course we have the usual patterns on the ceiling and the walls, and it definitely pervades the impression that we are looking at a very incredible edifice that represents the oldest Catholic congregation in the United States. Now let's look at the Treasury on the Plaza, Central Bank, originally built in 1927, and it's parked right next door to the Cathedral Basilica that we just looked at. Very interesting structure, and even though it was built well after the Cathedral Basilica, it does strangely have some interesting overlapping architectural stylings. But I'm sure given the advancements by 1927, that throwing up a building like this that looked like a building that was built well over 100 years earlier is easy and simple. Where have I seen that elevated dome structure on top before? Oh yes, I recall. It was on top of our asylum in Cherokee, Iowa. Very impressive coloring with this structure, and it would be interesting to really get an idea of how they were able to pull this off in the 1920s. Now, let's recall that the 1920s was the great building boom across the United States. Every single city, and even the smaller cities, were building incredible buildings as fast as they could. Because not only were there architects everywhere to be found, there were workers everywhere to be found, there were materials everywhere to be found, and logistics were no concern because they had rapidly and quickly established the highway system. So it's very easy to explain the rapid building of all these buildings across the entire United States. And looking at this older image, we can see how impressive this Treasury building or central bank originally looked like. Now, this image supposedly shows us what the two buildings looked like before they expanded the cathedral, because we're told that they expanded the cathedral and added the tower later. Don't they always have a story like that? And we got some images of the interior, and it looks like our classic bank where we have a lot of well-dressed people partying what appears to be during Christmas. And yet, we can get an idea when we look in the background of the photo of some of the elaborate construction. So let's take a look at some better photos. And look at this. Here again, we have these very well-adorned columns, because what else would you have? And they do appear to be sectional, although in larger sections. And then, of course, the decoration up in the ceiling and what appears to be a skylight and plenty of arches. Now, I said earlier that this is a wedding venue, and do you see the nice vault there? Apparently, that's representing the original bank origin of this structure. The vault is quite fascinating to me because apparently they have many photos of couples getting married actually in the vault. Now, I always joke in the past that you know it's a true old world building when it can be a wedding venue. And when I say that, I mean it can be a successful wedding venue. That is, the marriage has a better than 50% chance of lasting longer than 20 years. There's some other very interesting interiors that we have, though, within this structure. And you can see that there seems to be some block-like construction that's very well adorned, and we also have the arches. So again, showing more advanced construction techniques. And then we look at other images of it, and we can see how it compared and how the lower portion of the building is. Again, it doesn't look like it contrasts so much with the Cathedral Basilica, despite the vast timeline difference in when they were built. And here you go. Here's one of these wonderful wedding photos within the vault. Not exactly what somebody would really think of for your wedding photography album, but you never know. I can see why it would appeal to somebody. But then when you look at other aspects of the building, and you can just see how beautiful it is. It definitely gives you the impression, though, that the vault was added much later. Now, I could be wrong. I wasn't there. I didn't witness it. I don't know. It just seems very out of place. Well, let's take a look at Ponce de Leon Hotel, 1885 to 1887, now part of Flagler College. That's right, this is another Flagler special, and it is I believe the main administration building of Flagler College, a private university. And looking at the older images on the postcards, we can see that this is a very impressive and well-decorated and well-detailed hotel. And again, all within the 1880s, because remember, Henry Flagler had all the resources that he needed. If you just have money, it can overcome anything. Maybe that's really how the Spanish conquistadors were able to achieve such tremendous victories over great odds. They just had an infinite amount of money. I remember playing the Pirates NES game back in the day, and I remember always trying to raid the Spanish treasure fleet when you could find it. And of course, we have a plaque with this one too, and the plaque just gives you the background and makes sure that you don't go off on crazy notions of what the alternate origin of this building could be, 1885 to 1887. And again, we see another deteriorating plaque. What exactly is going on with that? I mean, they're going to have to do a better job of rotating out these plaques to make sure that people see the plaques, because if they don't see the plaques, they're not going to know what the official account is. I noticed this menu here. I remember several months ago, or maybe even a year ago, when John Levi was looking at menus, and very interesting items on this particular menu for this hotel. Not exactly what we think of. And then we see another perspective of the hotel, and we can see that it almost has a unique series of arches with the classic adornments of what looks to be almost a dome and then a cupola on top of it. And then we can see it here in this image. Now granted, yes, these are just paintings and postcards, But it does give you an idea that the opulence of this building was appreciated in the early 20th century. And yet, once again, this is not the kind of structure we'll see today. And now you can see its new decorations as Flagler College. And very impressive brick. I would certainly love to determine what the exact structure and materials of this brick actually is by doing an in-person inspection. So suffice to say, there's going to be an on-site exploration for Saint Augustine. Definitely have to get over here and actually walk these buildings and examine them a little bit more closely. Because as you know, there's only so much we can do by looking at them with photographs. But still, it gives us an idea of just some of the detailed and architectural skill that we see in many of these great buildings. Now, some people want to suggest that we're not paying our due diligence and giving credit to the people who actually built these buildings. But when you look at these buildings, I think it's imperative that we pay credit to those that built them and give them the full appreciation that they deserve. Look at this ballroom with some of the circular geometric patterns and how it revolves around with some of the archways. And here you have it integrated with the bricks on what appears to be this balcony. And again, more detailed archways. Just an impressive structure inside and out. And I think it's always important to look at both aspects of the structure because the interior always gives you another whole element. Really? 2 to 3 years to establish this kind of interior? That is very impressive. Yes, I know, we had armies of craftsmen and artisans that were just running around the country and were readily available in the United States in the 19th century. But when you look at the opulence of some of the interior details on these incredible ballrooms and dining rooms and everything else that we have, you just have to ask, how did they do it? And these are rooms that survive to this day, where you see some of these arches and some of the beautiful paintings and detailings that go on the walls and the ceiling on this. Now, there is a connection to Moorish revival architecture, and that's what they would actually call some of these structures. And here we're looking up in the dome, and yet at the same time, it's almost as though you see a mix. You have a dome, but then again, you have the columns. So what exactly is going on? Is it really reflecting what we have with these different structures, or is it showing something else? And here, look at the detail in this fireplace. Unbelievable. Again, another part of Flagler College because we've got our classic podium. Oh, I'm going to say I do not miss podiums from university days. Look at the clock here, though, in this fireplace. And I really wonder what material this is actually made out of. Is this marble? Is this some sort of tiling? Or is this something else entirely? Definitely something I like to examine in person. What do we have here? Is that a Skeksis from the Dark Crystal? Please, please, I am friend, please. Well, it looks like we also have these structures that are documented. I like the title of this book, Built to Last, 100-Year-Old Hotels East of the Mississippi. Yes, of course, they were built to last, and they're standing perfectly today. In fact, let's take a look at another one, the Casa Monica Hotel, built 1888. It's pretty much all we have on it. It was built in 1888. Now, you're probably going to be asking, is this another one of the Henry Flagler hotels, since he basically built the whole city of Saint Augustine? Well, there's a little bit of a different story with this one. But as we can appreciate this, we can tell that it seems to have been modified from its original poured concrete. We have an account that it was covered with some sort of stucco to change the appearance. Although, here's what it originally looked like in 1888, or whenever they actually built it, whenever this photo was taken. And here you can get a better idea with this technique of pouring concrete in layers. At least that's what we're told. Well, if this is so effective, then why didn't this continue? And this is Franklin W. Smith, and he's the one who persuaded Flagler to invest in the area. He ultimately built this building, but then sold it to Flagler. And he was the one who supposedly came up with this revolutionary technique of pouring concrete. And of course, when you look closely at the concrete of all these hotels and these structures, you get the idea that you're dealing with something that's a lot more advanced and a lot more durable and far more enduring than the lovely Portland cement that we love to use on everybody's driveway. I'm really impressed by some of the details, though, that you see in the structure, and whether it was covered with stucco or not, or it was the original concrete, it's incredible how new and impressive the structure looks now. And after looking at many different old world buildings over time, this is definitely one of the more impressive ones with how well it endures to this day. Of course, someone's going to write a book looking at these structures, these 100-year-old plus hotels that are all east of the Mississippi. And even here you can get a different idea of how the original pouring of the concrete must have looked, but I still would like to have seen it done, because once again, photographic detailing of these building constructions are a little difficult to come by. I can't imagine why. Again, in the interior though, you see the same beautiful detailing with the many different arches, and then I like the decorations on the columns. Now granted, these are narrower columns, a different style, but still very beautiful. And once again, this is truly a hotel that gives you the appearance of opulence and luxury. There's no way that a Holiday Inn Express, or really any of our current modern hotels, could ever compare with this. I mean, maybe you think they can. I don't know, I don't like the fountain in the middle there, that just kind of bothers me. I prefer my brutalist architecture hotel, I'm more comfortable in it. Kidding. But when you see some of the way these arches and then the ceiling go together, and then I just really appreciate the lights. There's just so much character and, dare I say, humanity within this structure. It's also within the coloring too, because you don't have a monochrome concept with it, as you do in many quote-unquote postmodern buildings or hotels. And yet you also have the feeling of a long-held identity within it. And then looking on the outside at night when you see how these buildings are lit up, they're just very impressive. As though they give the indication that this is something that's once again going to spiritually revive you when you walk past it and you just appreciate its beauty, whether it's on the outside or the inside. And just to show a quick image of one of the rooms, and you see, yes, there is a bit of a relaxation aspect that comes with actually feeling like you're staying in a luxurious room. What a concept! And not just something that came off the printing press and you just go in there and get in, get out, and hopefully you get your 6 hours of sleep without being disturbed by whoever's above you, below you, or beside you. It's really intriguing though, seeing some of the decorations on these columns. Let's take a look at the Bridge of the Lions, originally built in 1927, rebuilt, renovated, and moved in 2010. Yes, I wish I was joking about that, but that's what the official account tells us. So they originally built this very impressive bridge, which has a couple of awesome lions in front of it, and we've seen those images before, and there are many connections with the symbols of those lions, especially when we consider some aspects of the Far East that we haven't gotten to yet, but we will. And the original account of constructing the bridge is that they tell us that they had started constructing it during the building boom, but then the building boom kind of ended just magically in Florida as fast as it stopped. So we're just lucky that they got the bridge finished. But as always, with a bridge that they quickly designated a National Historic Landmark, the bridge was not perfectly built. And you can see it's an actual drawbridge where it comes up and you can allow boats to pass underneath it. So it's an impressive engineering achievement. Albeit, in my personal opinion, not quite as impressive as the aerial lift bridge in Duluth, Minnesota, but this is something that's actually made out of concrete and not just a steel structure. Even so, in their own way, both bridges are very impressive. And it's even more impressive that we're to take this account that they moved this bridge and supposedly retained some of the key elements to it. Yet another one of these stories of renovation always has me scratching my head, because why is there always so much renovation, and why did the bridge do so well for so many decades and then it just seemed to rapidly erode and deteriorate? It just seems to indicate that there's something else going on than what we're actually told. Now, I'm not saying that. I'm just saying that the signs seem to be there. And here we can see one of the lions, and one of the other accounts that we have is that they moved the mighty lions back to their original position once they rebuilt the bridge, although they moved it, so I'm not exactly sure what's going on with this. Maybe there's somebody who's a little bit more familiar with Saint Augustine and was actually around when this happened, because it was relatively recent, who can let us know in the comments exactly what happened with the bridge. I have no doubt that there was an older bridge that was there, and in 1927 it was built, or at least they tell us it was built. But was it really? Because as we found as we gone with these explorations, it seems that things become a lot more obfuscated far later than the traditional years that we like to think. Normally we think things are obfuscated in the 19th century, but as we go on with these explorations, we find that things get very confused as late as 1935, 1940, and even then we can find interesting accounts of what happened along with World War II. Well, let's take a look at Castillo de San Marcos, or Castle of St. Mark, built 1672 to 1695, and this is our patented geometrically precise foundation structure. And you know the other name that we have for these things, but it's been called many different things. Here's the Spanish engineer Ignacio Daza. He was dead right after he arrived and did the plans, so as was the governor who was there. So they established this, and then they quickly had to pull it down. And he died right after he arrived. But fortunately, he gave a single perspective plan, which had a lot of different words on it, And, you can build a really complex fort or castle from a single perspective plan. I don't know, you always get these same stories with this fort, and eventually they changed the name of it from Castle to Fort St. Mark and then Fort Marion, and during the Civil War it was held by the Union, and they gave it to the Confederates when they issued a receipt to the one Union soldier who stayed, and then the Confederates gave it back to the Union without a fight. So despite the fact that it's a very well constructed fort, castle, or geometrically precise foundation structure, nobody really seemed to want to fight for it. Now, there are accounts that the English were raiding the area, and that's what prompted the Spanish to build the fort and commit over 20 years to doing so. Unfortunately, the poor engineer who came in from Havana died shortly after he arrived, but they were still able to complete the fort off a single perspective sketch drawing. Very impressive. I just always enjoy all these accounts about how we're always able to achieve these incredible things, and let's not talk about logistics, because if you're an engineer or an architect, that automatically makes you an expert in logistics, because there's lots of people that say that. There's also lots of people say that they know architects who know architects that were mentored by famous architects, and therefore they can assure you, and will assure you with full certainty, that this structure in this account was built just as we were told it was. This is an interesting picture here. We're told that these are captured Native Americans who were brought into the fort by the United States military, allegedly. Although it looks like everyone's just chilling out in this photo and looks very relaxed. And who's even guarding these Native Americans if they are some sort of threat? They don't appear to be. Everyone's having a good old time. Now, this looks like a different single perspective sketch of this fort, but the question I'd have is, how high are you supposed to make the walls? I don't know. And you can see that it's a very well laid out and detailed, geometrically precise foundation structure, fort, a castle. And of course you need to have fine decorations on the doors there because there's lots of military purpose in fine decorations. Just like on the towers too. And yes, I am being sarcastic to level 10. Because when I see more and more of these structures, if you just take it at face value, but then you have all these accounts about how unbelievably incredible they were as a military fortification. And yet, if the English were harassing Spanish shipping, which is what we're told they were, with piracy or privateering or whatever you want to call it, why would you try to counter it by building a single fort? And could this fort really secure the entire city? Oh, look at that. We have another one of those old mortars. Well, yeah, if you have one of those old Civil War mortars that had nuclear shells, of course you could defend it. Maybe that was the real purpose behind it. What's really the story, though, behind the blocks within this? And if you ever go to a location like this, or you actually go to this specific location, I suggest you test the walls and the stones. Knock on them, see what their actual structure and properties really are. Get an idea of how it compares. You might see a crack in that, but how old is this thing really? Well, we're told that it's fast going on 400 years, supposedly, but does it really seem like it's 400 years old? Or is it older? Or is it not that old? Well, here we have our good favorite reenactors again, firing off a cannon because, cannons are the best way to defend things. All right, let's take a look at Castle Otis. And yes, there are 3 T's in Castle Otis, unless it's some sort of special pronunciation. Castle Otis. Or maybe Otis was actually the name of the whale that the English killed and then the Spanish couldn't defend the city without him. Now, this is the account that we have of Castle Otis. We're told it was built by 2 guys in 4 years, from 1984 to 1988. And I know you're saying, really? And this isn't an old world structure? Well, what exactly is this structure? Because I find this account problematic. No laborers, elevation drawings, or models. So they just completely bypassed the whole architect thing and hiring people to help them build it. It was just the 2 of them. You don't need drawings or models. Those are for people who can't accomplish anything. The building seemed to exert its own insistent will. Yes, they say this in the account of the building. Now look, I could not find any construction photos of this incredible Castle Otis. Somebody out there has to have some construction photos. The interior took another 3 years to complete, so 7 years total to do the exterior and the interior, and we're told that this was merely done as a fine work of art. It was to have no other purpose. Yes, a couple guys, and you can see their names listed down there, Otis Sadler and company, just a few of them. Well, they just decided to build a castle as a work of art because, why wouldn't you do something like that? No story about some sort of religious vision or great experience or anything like that. And here are some of the images that we have, and it's a pretty nice looking castle, and apparently it's actually constructed with real concrete or masonry or whatever. I'm not even going to venture a guess until I can actually go to this location in person and try to ascertain exactly what it's made out of. Interesting coloring on it as well. But when you look at this account and you just want to take this at face value, yeah, sure, two guys had nothing better to do. They threw this up in 4 years all by themselves, and then they did the interior. And maybe they did. But if they did, why are there no photos of it? Why can't I find any photos? Or I just didn't upload it to the internet yet. That doesn't mean they don't exist. Fine. Then someone, anybody out there, just let me know and send me an email in the channel email. There's got to be some construction photos of this. There's got to be something in the papers that show these two stellar individuals constructing this. I'm not making any sort of conclusions on this. I'm just saying there's a lot of hard questions with this Castle Otis with 3 T's. This is very interesting. You would think, though, that given the stunning achievement of two individuals building this exterior structure in the name of art by themselves would be just a little more well documented. Everybody loves to tell me it's very well documented. Yes, indeed. How well documented is it overall? Let's take a look at the interior that they took 3 years to finish constructing this on. Ah, yes, look at that. So, throw up a balcony, throw up a couple pieces of wood. I guess I could see that, that's something that we could do now. I'm not questioning that. But when you look at the exterior structure and the windows and everything, you get the impression, though, that there was a little bit more detail that went into it. I'm not sure, though. I would really have to see it in person and determine what it's actually like in person. But I don't know, there seem to be many mysteries behind Saint Augustine, and we're going to be continuing our explorations in Saint Augustine to include an on-site exploration. And there's also many houses or casas that we need to take a look at. Well, thank you for joining me today. Please like, comment, and subscribe.